Okay, greetings. Thank you so much for coming and for hanging in there to near the end of this Boston M. I see some of you who I know and some of you who I don't know. Welcome in both categories. For those of you who do not know me, let me spend a minute or a minute and a half just saying a moment about me, because it sort of orient you to my point of view. I don't know anything about consumers, nothing. Nor am I interested in knowing anything about consumers. Because my belief is consumers is much too small of a box to put people in to understand them for the purposes that we're here for, marketing. Okay, so my mantra over too many decades has been people, not consumers. And I come to that because my education and experience and inclination is I'm a cognitive anthropologist. So one, what is a cognitive anthropologist? And what the hell am I doing here? So I've sort of created this conjunction between cognitive science, neuroscience, and anthropology. So I could define it any way I want. And my definition is fairly simple, and it'll show you, I think, that what I'm trying to understand and deal with is exactly the same thing you are trying to understand and deal with. In the name of yourself, your agencies, your companies, and your clients. I call it understanding attachment. How do people come to attach to something? And that something could be a product, another person, an idea, an object, anything. A philosophy, a religion, doesn't matter. My study over nearly 40 years has been how do people come to attach to something? How do they create beliefs? How do those beliefs form in such a way under certain circumstances that you could show that group or persons irrefutable evidence that they agree with, that their belief is wrong, and their response is they just hold on to that belief even stronger. That's the nature of the mind. So I titled this talk, So What's Old but Still Relevant, and What's New in Marketing? Because I hear from clients, prospective clients, people I speak to in speeches, et cetera, recently, over the last couple of years, oh, Dr. Bob, everything is new. And I've heard that so many times, I sort of have a performance in the face of it, which is, huh? There is new technology, for sure. But that technology has to adapt to something, if you want to talk about modern Homo sapiens, 40,000 years old, which is this, the human mind. Okay, so let's not get too excited about everything is new. It's not. I think there is something relatively new, one thing, which I'll address in a moment. But that thing really is just, I think, an emphasis and a hyper-extension of another thing that's been with us forever. But we got away with not attending to it from 1950, let's say, to 2008, plus or minus. Okay, so that's the context that I'd like to speak to you about this morning. So people tell me search and social have changed purchase, changed everything. And we know, everyone knows, we've gone from person as viewer, person as participant, person, excuse me, as creator of content. We've gone from person-to-person communication to person-to-person conversation in the world of social media, digital, mobile. We've gone from what I like to call information gathering to experience gathering. Right? We're past hunter-gatherers in some sense. But the last bullet I have here is the issue I want to talk about today. Now we're at a point, because of the technology context we live in, that we've gone from brand, right? Product as brands, to me as brand. What's the product going to do for me to enliven me and extend my idea of who I am? That's the context of marketing that we live in today, I would suggest to you. To wit, right? We all know this. And this is a diagram by John Atkinson, who I asked permission to use. Me, 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 me. It's not indulgence, it's not greed, it's just an acknowledgement of the context has changed. So, what I'm suggesting is, along with pounding the product's chest, the brand's chest, making a lot of noise and making a lot of hoopla, one must go beyond, look at me. This seems to be a very hard concept. Short story. I was asked to go out to a company. They have 35 food products, food and beverage products, and each one has a product director. So I went out, I was asked to go out and speak to them. Okay, here I am. I say to them, I have nothing to say to you, but I have one question. And the question is, what domain do you operate in? And 35 people gave me answers. For example, the first answer was yogurt. Right? Second answer was cereal. And on it went. And my response to that was, you're not wrong, but you're not right. And I'm saying that to make a point, of course. My answer to what domain does this company live in is the morning, M-O-R-N-I-N-G. And I was saying that because I wanted them to think about turning their attention, turning their focus 180 degrees away from where they usually focus. They usually focus on their products and their attributes and people's interests and how those attributes satisfy those people's interests. Well, I offer to you the possibility that if you only do that, at best you create a highfalutin commodity. You have no approach to being, let's call it, a brand. So I'm going to try to develop with you a concept. And you notice I'm a real anthropologist. I think about evolution and primates, including the human primate. I want to develop a concept with you called improvisational co-authoring. I think this is the dynamic that's required now in the so-called digital social media context. And this implies knowing something or knowing the real story of what a story is. Everybody tells me now, oh, you got to see my story. And it's in 99 out of 100 cases, it's not a story. A story is not problem, solution, result. A story requires a couple of things. One is one character with a point of view. Second thing it requires is an obstacle. Because of that obstacle, a surprise or a shift in action, a resolution, or a sense of a resolution. There are hardly any stories we put out there as an industry that, for my idea, are really not stories. So I'm going to talk about that. So here's just an example. I saw this a month or so ago in a magazine. Cadillac. And I'm not pointing a finger at Cadillac. I'm saying this is emblematic of a lot. Luxury is measured in carats, thread counts, and occasionally horsepower. Attributes, attributes, attributes. And one big thing, there's millions of things as far as I'm concerned, but one thing that makes that less than sufficient is, okay, wow, that's great, that car has X number of horsepower. Ooh, I'm excited. And then tomorrow I hear about another car that has X plus 1 horsepower. Well, yesterday's excitement is gone. You need, of course, what I would call emotional attachment and something I would also call narrative integration, which I'll address in a moment. Okay? And let me go back to this little amoeba-shaped, two-colored, let's call them yellow and orange figure above those two characters' heads. That's the image I want to start with and leave you with. Okay? Your products that you represent, the brands that you represent, let's say, is on the right side, and the world, what I like to call people, are on the left side. You have to put out a story that is a girding for people to be able to insinuate their own story onto your story and make one story out of it. If you don't do that, go home and start again. And we'll see how that goes. So as I say, we need to turn 180 degrees out and look at and try to understand people as people. They're not linear, they're not wholly logical, and they're magnificent creatures. They don't just operate on expected utility theory, which is, okay, here's the attributes that I'm interested in. Here's the attributes that satisfy that of this product. Here's the attributes that satisfy that in this product. And let me calculate priorities and probabilities and come out with an answer and pick that product. I could assure you that no Homo sapien in the last 40,000 years has ever been inclined towards anything through that mechanism. Ever. Not once. Yet the whole apparatus, covert apparatus of the marketing system, let's call it, is based on that assumption, even when the talk of it is not. So I'm just trying to point out, nowadays, if anything I'm saying is true, we have to orient to try to understand people's identities, not just their interests, or not even their interests. Short story. I'm doing some work for a newspaper. Of course, newspaper readership is going down. So I was asked to come in to this particular newspaper and try to help stem the tide, so to speak. I like to work on impossible problems. I come there, and I say, well, what are you doing now? And they say, well, we've gone out to all the catchment areas that the newspaper services, and we've spoken to people, and we've asked them, what are you interested in knowing about and reading about and seeing that we don't show you in the newspaper? And they got answers. For example, one answer was high school sports. Okay, so once a week they put an insert in the newspaper about high school sports. Not one new subscription. And that went on and on until they increased the weight of the newspaper, 3.3 ounces. That's a lot of paper for no subscriptions. Because I think they're operating on a passé or never really valid model of how people attach. So, people, not consumers. Emotion rules the roost, not logic. That's half the argument against attributes. How people narrate their experience, that's the issue. Not asking people about how much do you use this product, when do you use it, how do you use it? Like, who cares? That's not going to help you one bit build strategy, to build brand, to build success. Okay, everyone does a lot of quantitative work. And then they see certain outliers and seeming contradictions in the data. And they do mostly one of two things. Average them out or just set it aside. Right? Muddies the waters. Right? I'm suggesting to you that what I'm calling paradox, contradiction, ambiguity, irony, is the mother lode of insight into understanding human beings. Because first of all, the complex context we live in today, everything has paradox. Everything is multifaceted. Everything is love and hate, cashmere and sawdust. Everything. Complicated. The other thing is, human beings, as much as they can experience their own self, are a rat's nest of paradoxes. We all are. That's not a problem. That's not bad. That's what makes us interesting. That's what makes us human. We're not robots. We don't act wholly, linearly, objectively, statistically. Metaphor. That's your job, from my small vantage point of cognitive anthropology. How to make a metaphor to help people just instinctually create that merging of their story and your story into the same story. That's your task. Identity, not interest. Interest, everyone has interests. and you could satisfy those interests. They're not going to get you that much. And even if they do, that list is endless. You ask me what I'm interested in, I'll give you a list of 100 things. And you satisfy them. And I'll say, thank you very much. I really like you. And by the way, I have 20 more things I just thought of. The list is never ending. That's also not bad. That's human. People, not consumers. Let's think about people, not just our products. Most marketers don't like to do that. I'll leave it to you to fill in the story of why. I'm sure each of you have many of your own stories. People are pattern makers, first of all. They see two things, they could be contradictory. They could be totally independent of each other. But the human mind is such, it'll try to make a pattern between the two, a relationship between the two. That's what the mind does. You have no choice in it. You can't just go, huh? Symbol makers. Most things come to stand for something more than what they are. If you understand something about that, you got a leg up. The mind is a narrative maker. Again, it has no choice. The great work on this I would recommend to you is by a man named Michael Gazzaniga. He has amazing experiments and stories to prove that the mind incessantly cannot do anything else other than make narrative. Beautiful. Very important for our work. Our work meaning marketing. And I have some stories too, particularly in my new book called The 5 Essentials. Metaphor makers. And this is all in the service of people have to make meaning. Meaning is not given to us. Meaning is a design, a creative design. We are all artful creators of meaning. And how we do that, as I say, is nonlinear, not wholly logical. And I think Picasso had something going, some insight going when he developed Cubism. Because if you look at how cognition works, it's like a Cubist painting. Sort of things that are put together don't really belong together. But that's the beauty of the human mind. Picasso actually said, I have thought in my hand. I'm not sure he knew how right he was. So people operate on what I would like to call an emotional logic. It's not logical, but it's not illogical or without logic. It's just a logic based upon emotion. It's not chaos. A lot of marketers are afraid of emotion. It's like, I can't get my hand around it. It's too idiosyncratic, it's too personal, it's too situational. And it is all those things, but it's also a universal mechanism that produces it. The content varies. The underlying mechanism is pretty rule-governed. And that allows us to communicate even. If we didn't have a basis other than chaos to relate to each other, we couldn't relate to each other. We wouldn't be here. This is a very old ad that I just love. An old Alfa Romeo print ad that appeared in color with a red car. Against, it only carries 2 people, can't take much luggage, you can't use the top down very much, and your hair always gets windblown, right? And 4, they just show the goddamn picture of the car. That's it. When you have that metaphorical merging that I'm referring to between my story of myself and my story of you, it's what I call a spasm of sentiment. It has no logic, it has no attributes, it doesn't need anything in support of it. It just, the feeling is, that's me. And that can help me be more than me. That's key. I'll go into that in a minute. Brand as attachment. So as I say, I've been at this about 40 years. If I'm sure of only one thing, this is it. How you get people to sort of wrap their own story intermingled with your story takes three requirements to be satisfied, to satisfy. One is people has to have some sense of familiarity with what you're presenting, up to, mean, whatever. Familiar. Familiar is the most potent thing in human experience. You could almost define neurosis or a million other psychological states, negative psychological states, and just get stuck into the familiar. Okay, but I want to talk about it in terms of the expression. It's like me. Okay, they have to have some sense of, it took me about 17 years to figure this out. Familiarity does not lead to satisfaction. Okay? It leads to relief, which is a totally different emotion, totally different biology to it, and neurology to it. Okay? And by relief, I mean when someone experiences something and they see something about it that's familiar, they just go like this. Oh, God, thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't have to start all over again. Okay? That's what I mean by relief. That's familiar. The next thing is people have to have a sense of it. It means, in this case, any of the products or brands or anything that you're trying to represent with a positive result for marketing purposes. They have to feel it likes me. Not I like it. Likability is cheap, but we constantly talk about it. Oh, I have to get people to like us. I suggest to you, not. You have to get people to feel that it likes them. It understands them. It lets them participate with it. It just doesn't levy demands down or is a closed system. Now, I would even say there's some advertising that's not bad at satisfying familiarity and participation / trust. There's hardly any good advertising, because a good advertising campaign, message, anything, requires the third thing. The first two things are affirming the audience and confirming the audience. In other words, they're important, but they take no courage on the marketer's part. Oh yeah, let's just be positive. The power dimension is the only thing that creates the emotional attachment of what marketing calls branding, what I'm calling attachment. And that is the person's recognition that you might be familiar, you might like me, but you and I are totally different, right? We're not psychotic. But in that difference, you, the product, the idea, whatever, you can help me be more of me. So you're going to help me recalibrate my familiar and grow. That's a challenge to the audience. That's not an appeasement to the audience. That takes creativity and a little guts. If those things happen, you just get what I was calling before, a spasm of sentiment. It's like, it's impermeable to dismantling. It's rock solid and it's forever. It's almost impossible to dismantle a belief. And I'm saying beliefs, for the most part, are established this way. So the power dimension is really the key. Okay, and it leads to, you're going to help me become more of myself. So this is an important phrase. I'm not talking about fantasy. I'm not talking about my ideal self. You know, I want to be like Mike, or something like that. Okay? I'm talking about everyone has what I'm calling a self-story. It's intimate to them, it's potent to them, and it's real. And it's not all beautiful. Part of it is wondrous, part of it is warts. But it's real story that drives people's behavior. And I think this is a very important concept which takes up about half my book. It's also, I should say, a footnote, or small print at least. If one investigates, even for marketing purposes, to get a handle, to get some little handle on people's self-story, it's not only amazingly helpful to develop strategy and how to implement strategy. I think there's a better payoff, which is it'll make your lives more interesting, your work lives happier and more satisfied. You're finding out about the real guts of life, not crap. Let me just say a few quotes now. So this whole idea about become more of me, people being interested in what I'm calling self-expansion and how you're going to help them. Okay, this is a person in the context of a very much broader conversation about technology, ends up talking about the iPhone. Okay? The iPhone, like Apple, is a circle. So I'm already interested in that, right? It's like, what? The iPhone, like Apple, is a circle. This is a quote. It's smooth. It glides. That's the way the man was saying it to me. It's easy and it feels good. All other phones and service providers are a box. They have corners and squares, are highly structured, and have many rules, and are too technical, and are too linear. And he goes on. And they're too corporate. He points at me yelling, right? The iPhone is fun and natural, and lets me do my own thing, create new things, and become a bigger me. Big time stuff. And I would suggest to you, embedded in here is an axiom, let's call it. When a product or a brand is really a brand, not just we call it a brand, people don't talk about it in prose. Never. They talk about it in terms of poetry, like a circle versus a box. It changes the whole linguistic system one operates in about that product. So the key is to give your audience the experience of you're helping them have the freedom to become themselves. So in everyone's self-story, there are things that are latent. They're there. They're not there. but they're latent. And if you could if you could give them a sense that through you, they can make manifest even one little more iota what is already latent in them, make it real, make it obvious, make it tangible, make it behavioral, you have them. You have them for their own purposes, not for your purposes. Because once people have that experience of self-expansion, it's addictive. Just another short example. This Nobuo Matsuhita, a famous chef and restaurateur, he has a beautiful quote. I didn't interview him, I just saw this in a document. Quote, "For me, cooking is about giving my customers little surprises," key word, "that lead them to make discoveries about their own latent desires." Okay, if you take the word cooking out and replace it for whatever you're up to, that's an important sentence. For me, fill in the blank, is about giving my customers little surprises that lead them to make discoveries about their own latent taste. One more and then I'll stop with this point. This is a project I was doing on luxury. Again, my projects are not, okay, let's think about luxury products. I don't care about luxury products. I'm interested in what makes something a luxury experience. That's the only thing that's important. And once you know that, the world opens up. So I'm speaking to many people. Here's just one quote that addresses this idea of self-expansion. So one woman I interviewed recently bought a fairly expensive, but not exuberantly expensive, Mont Blanc fountain pen. Okay? Quote, "I've wanted to buy a great fountain pen for as long as I can remember, but I never have. Despite the economy," and then she'd pause and say, "Oh, maybe because of the economy," meaning who knows what tomorrow will bring, "I bought it. I did, and I'm so happy. It feels so sensual, so luxurious in my hand. I think better writing with it. It helps me get down to my deepest thoughts and feelings. I find me with this Mont Blanc pen in my hand." Now, in one sense, me included, I could hear this, and when I heard it the first time, a person sitting across the desk from me, it was like, wow, you know? And I had a chuckle. In another sense, it's very important, because it really represents the nature of attachment and branding. So the bazillion, trillion, dollar question is, so what's required now to fashion effective conversations with people through social media and everything else you have in the digital space? Well, a couple of things, I would say. Let me suggest to you, it's easy to get an audience to see what you put out in the world and go, wow. That's easy. But that wow drops off as fast as it goes up. It has hardly any, if ever, any persistence. But to have an audience in response to what you put out, in a sense, instead of going, wow, they go like this. They sort of look up and go, and they go into this little self-contained thinking pattern, feeling pattern, narrative pattern. That's what you want. That's what you want. And this requires everyone's talking now about content development. Well, good content is one interesting. In other words, it shows people as real people. And it makes, this is the way I say it, good content shows us real people doing things that make us, the audience, go beyond what's well known to something that's known well. Okay? It defamiliarizes the familiar. So as if you know something for the first time. It's an insight that opens up something to you that it's both familiar and novel at the same time. That's interesting content. That's a definition of interesting content. Memorable content. Memorable is, it elicits some kind of impulse towards exploration and discovery, which is another way of talking about self-expansion. Very, very, very important. We don't give enough credence to stimulating people's curiosity. And I have great stories about that in my book. Great because not they're in my book, because they're from people who just had fantastic stories. Another requirement, I think, in the world today, I call e pluribus unum, from the many one. And that's that image I had at the title page. My story and millions of other people's stories have to merge into something that's unitary. It has suppleness, but it has an underlying commonality. But it's not brittle. There's a lot of brittle, quote, brands. I wouldn't call them a brand. By brittle, I mean everyone in the world thinks about them the same way. Not satisfactory enough. And how you get people to merge their story with your story, and I actually said that wrong. You can't get them. You could help them along. You can't get them. You can't persuade them. At least for me. People say to me, Bob, help me persuade people of this. Don't hire me. I have no idea how to persuade people, other than through coercion. But to get them to walk through a door that you want them to get through, but they walk through it for their own reasons, right? Takes what I'm calling this idea of mutual work, improvisational co-authoring. You have to put out stories in such a way, whether they're online, in-store, in print even, static, that you can elicit this dynamic of narrative merging. And it's trainable. You have to know a real story about what's narrative, some dynamics of cognition, and some dynamics of attachment. And then you have to practice. And most people could do it. Some people are doing it already. Just that's their temperament. A small portion of the audience never will do it. I mean, of my audience, clients. And the middle, the vast middle, they could get it happily. And they're enlivened for it themselves, let alone helping their customer and helping their client and helping their company and helping their agency. So, help people make manifest what's latent in them, right? Help them find their own me and help them through some curiosity and enhance sensuality. In other words, feel their own feelings. Let them explore how to expand me. So, just to make the point, improvisational co-authoring is not about data and correlations. Big data is anaporish, right? It's voluminous. It's mountain high. But until it can get its arms around the curvaceousness of human experience and feeling and emotion, it's nowhere. Click-throughs and eyeballs, and it's just, who cares? It doesn't do you any good. Just make work. So you need to know something about who people are, their identity, not their interests, right? You have to know something about human nature and the nature of mind. And that's fun to get into that. It really is fun. And then you strategize of how to escalate up, organically, not through some artificial means that's really going to lead nowhere. So here's the anthropologist talking, looking at eons of time. What people want always, they want to tap into their essential resources of curiosity, sensuality, openness, and their ability to deal with paradox. And they use that to uncover and continue to uncover their own self-story. You know, I start my book with a quote from Bob Dylan. Quote, "I was born very far away from where I was supposed to be born. I'm always on my way home." Right? And finding your self-story and evolving your self-story, that's home. But it takes a poet to say it correctly, not me. And if you could help people do this at all the touch points, your client is going to be successful, your company and agency is going to be successful, and you're going to be successful. And part of what success means to me is you're going to love your work. You're going to be jumping for joy. There's too many people going through the motions at work, just totally disembodied from what they do, because they know what they do is just a bunch of crap. I don't have too much time about this, but in my book, I had the serendipitous luck, real luck, of first meeting Wynton Marsalis through work I was doing for MasterCard, and they endow jazz at Lincoln Center in New York with certain monies every year. So I asked the CMO of MasterCard if I could get to speak to Wynton Marsalis. And my point was, I want to speak to him about how does a person become open, right? Because to be improvisational, which a lot of jazz is, you have to be open, right? No plan. You know, like Wynton says, jazz has a lot of rules, and you have to know them. But you have to know how to make apply those rules such that you make something new every night. That's what you have to make people feel. Marsalis led me to an interview with Paul Simon. Amazing. All these people, I've learned, they're not just they're amazing entertainers and musicians and composers. They're just amazing people, and they happen to overlay that on their talent. And by amazing, I mean they really have insight into the human state of affairs. What does it mean to live a life? And I suggest to you, Paul has certain concepts like, I say you have to have a girding. You have to present your story in terms of a girding by which people insinuate their story onto your story. Again, a poet. He says, I'm telling him about this, he says, oh yes, he says, that's what I call, for a song to be popular and good, it has to have, quote, a beautiful emptiness. And I say that now because everyone is putting out, I would say, too much information. You know, here's everything. It's like there's no room for growth. There's no room for reverie or romance even. And there's a documentary called Under African Skies, where Paul, and anyone could see, that he talks about how he made Graceland, the album Graceland. It's, if you just substitute the context of making an album with the context of making marketing, there's tremendous insight into this. He's really amazing. And Bruce, the boss. So, this I must read you. It's in my book on page 65. Paradox. Paradox is so incredibly important. It really opens people up to the possibility, not the guarantee, the possibility of innovative thinking, self-expansion. So, Mr. Springsteen on paradox. This is a quote. Don't take yourself too seriously. Take yourself as seriously as death itself. Don't worry. Worry your ass off. Have ironclad confidence, but doubt. It keeps you awake and keeps you alert. Believe you're the baddest ass in town, and you suck. Quote. It keeps you honest. And he concludes with this little two sentences, or I should say big two sentences. Be able to keep two completely contradictory ideas alive and well inside your heart and your head at all times. That's paradox. If it doesn't drive you crazy, it will make you strong, and you will live. So, let me end that way. If you help people live, have that experience of being alive, and I'm suggesting do that through what I'm calling the 5 essentials, then you're better than a marketer. You're a marketing shaman. And I mean that. I don't mean that as a joke. Okay? You want to help people in the name of your clients and your agencies and your companies make money. But you also want to make magic. You want to make people have a larger sense of the idea of who they are. That's your responsibility. To yourself and to your audience. Go do it. Thank you.